Whenever we brief the team from a design perspective, the word that I always use is I want someone to feel transported.
This is Keys to the Shop, Founder Friday edition. Today we're talking with Andre Chanco of Yardstick Coffee in Singapore. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and of course, I'm always happy to have you along for the ride today, and these stories just keep coming. The world of coffee is so huge. The topics that we can discuss, the people that we can talk to and have conversations with and explore their journey, it all serves to give you those insights, inspirations, and tools that we talk about. We've been doing this for quite a long time now, over 1,000 episodes, and no signs of slowing down here. So to stay up to date, in order to get the most out of this show, then I would say you should subscribe to the show. Subscribe just by hitting subscribe on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. If it's on YouTube, you can like, share, hit the notification bell. And I think that's all the stuff you're supposed to say. But the point is Keys to the Shop is out here on every platform. So I hope that you have your preferred platform kind of zeroed in on the show, because we come out with a lot of content each month. So thank you very much. Now, today's episode, of course, is brought to you by some fantastic sponsors, our friends Arto Brick in Los Angeles, at Arto Brick on Instagram, and then the Pacific Barista Series, the plant-based beverage OGs in the space. And we're going to talk more about both those companies later on. I did want to mention to you, we do have our key holder coaching groups, these peer mentorship mastermind groups, 6 months of regular 2-hour session meetings focusing on member issues. We all collectively come together to discuss, to give insights, to ask questions, to gain clarity, and move the needle on business and personal development. And that community, it literally is one of the most important parts of this. Is you're with a group of people, 5 to 6 coffee shop owners that are there to help you succeed and are freely sharing, where there's a lot of vulnerability, there's a lot of openness, and even some pushback here and there, some challenging the thoughts that we have and assumptions we have. I've been able to see so many different wonderful outcomes from the past 4 seasons. Now it's been 2 years. We're getting ready to do the 5th season in September. And if you want to join in, then all you need to do is apply. Apply to be considered for membership, which is going to be selected in September. And we're starting in September. So August is the month to do this. You can reach out directly to me. Let me know you're interested, or you can fill out the application by clicking the link in the show notes. So today we're going to be talking with the founder of Yardstick Coffee in Singapore, Andre Chanco. He began his professional career in the world of IT consulting and worked for a multinational corporation before pivoting into coffee quite unexpectedly. He began roasting for a very popular company, one of the foundational specialty coffee brands in Singapore, called Papa Palheta. And he immersed himself in the coffee world and eventually became a full-time apprentice in roasting. And over the years, he took on responsibilities that you would in that role, like green buying and marketing, all of these things that proved really foundational to his future. So in 2013, Andre started Yardstick Coffee, and that was really just a project with his friends from university. That would be Kevin and Jessica. And this was just a wholesale roasting company, B2B wholesale roasting company, and it's grown into so much more. Today, Andre serves as the head of product and brand for the company. This company started, like I said, as this B2B coffee roaster and equipment distributor, official partners with La Marzocco, Rocket Espresso in the Philippines. They do certification workshops for the SCA, and they have now 9 stores across the Metro Manila area, with plans to open 2 more by the end of this year in 2025. There are other sister companies that have opened since Yardstick has been founded, a home coffee company called Morning, and then also an event called coffee festival called Coffee Please. Andre's also spun off another company called Standard Supply Studios, which helps with equipment distribution and curates great coffee equipment. So, from just humble beginnings of a B2B coffee roastery, spreading into the retail world and a lot of different other companies that have come from that initial beginning of Yardstick in 2013, Andre and his crew have done wonders for coffee and the coffee culture in Singapore. They're one of the originals in the area. And so this is a great conversation with somebody whose story has produced a lot of opportunities for other people's stories in coffee, facilitating success of wholesale partners, people working in the cafes. And in this conversation with Andre, we're going to be diving into that whole arc of professional development and founding this company. And then the lessons that are learned about how he's developed as an owner and founder, how this team works together, and the culture of coffee in Singapore, and just hospitality and operations in general. I think this is a fantastic Founder Friday. And I'm really thankful to have gotten a chance to talk with Andre. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with the founder of Yardstick Coffee in Singapore, Andre Chanco. Well, hey, Andre, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you with us today.
Hey, Chris. Super grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You've got quite the legacy. One of the OGs of coffee in Singapore. Yardstick has been around since 2013, right?
That's about right. Yeah. 11 years now.
Yeah, 11 years. I mean, that's no small feat. And before that, you were in coffee too, before starting Yardstick in various roles. And I think that's going to come into play here as we start the conversation with the idea of being over a decade into your own business in coffee and then having other businesses. I mean, this type of stuff doesn't fall into your lap normally, just instantly. This is developed. This is as you've developed as a professional. So I guess the first question is like, what is it that made you feel coffee was a profession in the first place? Because that's not normal for most people. For us, it's normal now. But where did you come from and how did coffee kind of invade the professional space for you?
Before Yardstick, there were, I would say, a couple of steps. I was in corporate post university. I was doing kind of systems consulting for a consulting firm. And then on weekends, I would visit a cafe. And then, as you know, it's downhill from there, right? In the most positive way. I just tasted coffee from a local roaster in Singapore. And I guess that was the light bulb moment. How come coffee can taste this good? But even before university, when I was younger, I think entrepreneurship was quite natural in the family. So my mom started her own school. So I was in that kind of environment. So even when I joined corporate, I was like, I'll be here for like 2-3 years and then do my own thing. And I think what was beautiful about coffee was, at least on hindsight, and back then, is it allowed me to do several things apart from just making coffee.
Okay, so it allowed you to do what exactly? Because now you have this entrepreneurial culture within your home, and I imagine that's part of what that other thing is.
At that time, at least, to build a space. I've always wanted to maybe run a restaurant or a cafe, but I'm like, that's too complicated. And I think coffee kind of distilled it to be in a very simple type of operation and allowed me to build a space where we could host people and have conversation, at least in 2009, right? When I first tried, kind of like, I was blown away by the beverage.
Yeah. So then you're being blown away by the beverage then means you get to enjoy it for a while, right? As a customer. And then you worked in it. How did you get to work in it? What was the first step into the industry for you?
Yeah. So I was in corporate. When I visited the cafe, I was like, hey, can I work here on Saturdays? Can I work here on Sundays? Just to kind of understand the workings of it. And eventually I took a leave of absence from corporate just to understand what the word specialty coffee meant. I was knocking on doors, emailing people, like understanding, hey, how do I get into coffee? And then back then, a big conglomerate, Olam, so they deal with different commodities. They're like, hey, Andre, we're setting up a US office for specialty coffee. Why don't you meet this guy called Alan from Vol Cafe, who will eventually set up our US office? So I sent a few emails, and then they're like, hey, Andre, fly to the US, visit this place, this person, that retreat. And to me, that was like mind blowing. So he set me up with everyone from the West Coast to the East, from the intelligentsias to the stumptowns. Because I think Alan's been in the industry for quite a while. So he was like, hey, Andre, knock on Doug's door. He'll talk to you about roasting. And then, so to me, that was an eye opener where when I first tasted coffee, I did not know about the roasting part of it. But that kind of US road trip for a month gave me a different perspective about, oh, so before this cup happened, there's this thing called sourcing and roasting. And to me, that changed the business model, to be honest. Like I thought I would be confined within just four walls, but with roasting, I thought it was a more scalable business than running a cafe. So after that kind of 1 month road trip, went back to Singapore to that cafe. And I was like, hey, can I learn how to roast? And it was supposed to be 3 months and it ended up becoming 3 years because, I mean, number one, we enjoyed working together. And number two, I also found out that you can't learn it in 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 months, right? So that was a 3-year apprenticeship of sorts.
That's really great. And taking that little tour, changing your perspective on the industry or deepening your perspective on the industry, it's nice that you were able to take that and then go back and apply a little bit of what it was that rubbed off on you. Because, a lot of people might get that window into the industry, but then come back. There's no coffee shop. There's no roaster. There just is head knowledge, but you applied it to yourself and that business right away. How did you develop as a roaster, and how did that help this business that you were working for at that time to really cut your teeth? How did that help them develop as well?
I think my experience is pretty normal from a global perspective, where normally these companies are small, right, independent, and people move on from being a barista to a roaster, and they end up starting their own thing or they move to a different company. So with this, when I asked them for an apprenticeship, it was perfect timing in the sense that the head roaster then was leaving to start another company in Singapore, right? So it was just kind of the stars aligned. And now that company is globally well loved as well. But because the company is so small, and I'm sure you know this, we end up doing everything, right? From like making coffee in the weekend, roasting during the weekday, figuring out our online store, trying to learn how to market this washed Ethiopian coffee, getting our feet wet, visiting Origin, which was very fortunate.
Well, in the Singapore area during that time, this is the mid 2000s and early mid, I call it mid because that's like prime time for my careers in that area. But maybe for other people, that means a later date. That's because I'm just old. But I assume it's similar to what was happening with third wave coffee. I mean, people are pretty plugged into what's happening in the industry globally. But I'm curious what the temperature of the culture of coffee was like in Singapore at that time.
This was 2009-10. And if we look at kind of its formative years, where I think Stumptown, they were pretty early, but Square Mile was in 2008. Kopi, Coffee Collective, 2007, the guys down in Melbourne, like Market Lane, Seven Seeds, 2007, 2008, 2009. And with Singapore, what was happening was Singaporeans will be going to university in Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, and then they would get exposed to the cafe culture and replicate it back home. So Singapore then was very much influenced by the Australian coffee scene, but it was also kind of like the starting of third wave in pockets of cities around the world, right? And Singapore is very much connected, as you say.
Okay, yeah. So the influence of that particular movement was kind of hand in hand with what was happening in Singapore. So the standard for service and coffee and maybe, the prerequisite of having an obsession about coffee and pour overs and single origin espressos and that kind of thing. Was that a hallmark for you all, at least in the 3 years that you were roasting and helping this company develop?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think from sourcing single origin coffees, different brew methods, and translating that experience in a cafe to someone who is brewing coffee at home. I think that movement was happening globally, right? People were just, hey, now you can have this great experience in a cafe. But guess what? Here's a V60, here's an AeroPress. And, everyone's giving you a brew guide on how to make a coffee. Well, it's back in the day, but I would remember watching all these videos on YouTube and reading forums online. I think back then we probably didn't have kind of formal education. And so much of what we were learning back then was what was said in this forum and in that discussion. And at least for me, is in that 1 month in the US, I was just really impressed by how generous people were. I was going to ask them, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? What temperature is that? Right. And I think that's what makes our industry special. That I think by default, we just want to share what we're doing. Right. And then I was a customer then. I was like, oh, it's pretty cool. So generous, rather than kind of like keeping it to yourself. In Singapore, it's pretty much the same thing in 2009, 10.
Okay. Yeah. And the idea of, I don't know where I've got this impression from, but I think it's just general hospitality, hotels, and things like this, where the expectation for hospitality in a place like Singapore seems like it would be higher than the average city.
I think the standard has changed over the years and for the better. I think what is challenging with Singapore in general is costs are expensive, right? And when you're running hospitality, food and beverage, margins are not very thick, right? So every kind of parcel of that, whether it's labor, rent, and I think Singapore's one of the more expensive ones in the world. And 11 years later, it's challenging. Like looking at kind of the Singapore industry and landscape, it was much easier back in 2009 to 10 compared to today, unfortunately.
Really? It just got more expensive, harder to do business?
Exactly. And there was an article 2 months ago where last year, 3,000 food and beverage establishments shut, right, in a very small country. So that impacts, wholesale accounts or even the willingness to start a coffee business, right? And that's also, with respect to the Singapore government, they're so helpful with grants and support to start your own business. And still, there are the kind of external challenges that make it difficult to run hospitality or food and beverage or coffee in Singapore today.
The passion for starting something is always high with coffee, I think. It's constantly I want to start a coffee shop. I want to start a roastery. And they do, and they can, and they get those grants. So barring external factors, as you just described, what was it about the brands that stuck around back then that helped them do that they had the same kind of, maybe they had the same kind of external environment that everybody else did, but what were they doing that helped them really have a good foundation?
If we look back, I think 2007, 2008, there was the kind of like economic recession globally, right? And people were leaving kind of like their jobs or getting let go, unfortunately. And they would say, hey, since I've got let go of my corporate job, I'll do my own thing. And then to some people, that was coffee, right? And because coffee is very, as you mentioned, it's very easy to start with, fit outs, and the business was quite simple, right? And because it was very simple, it was very easy to maintain, run, and there are limitations to that. So I think looking back to those companies that started in 2009, 10, 11 that are still present today in Singapore, they had a very simple business model to start with. But again, because maybe back then there was not so much competition. And then I was asking a friend of mine who works with 4,000 Japanese roasters. He runs kind of like an e-commerce out of Japan. I was like, hey, you speak to all these small different companies. What makes them successful, right? But obviously he answered me in a very Japanese way where success is very much personal. But he was like, out of all these companies that he has observed, coffee companies that are successful are usually run by someone who did not start in coffee as their first job. And then, so you mentioned passion, and I agree, we're all kind of driven by that, right? But if someone starts in manufacturing, finance, logistics, I think they just come into this industry with a different perspective compared to someone, I love coffee, I want to roast. I think that was quite an interesting insight. And then I started to look, across the industry with my friends and peers. I believe there's some truth into that, right? And I'm very fortunate for Yardstick. It's not only me, it's Kevin, Jessica, and myself. And we all worked in different industries prior to Yardstick. And we're still young, but at least I would say that the experience we had before Yardstick is very much valuable to what's happening today.
How so? Explain that a little bit more.
So Jessica worked in finance, and because she worked in finance, just a lot more strict with her numbers, and sometimes this is forgotten, and people are weak with Excel sheets, etc. I think now with AI, it's a lot easier. I was in corporate consulting. Every day is a new day, problem finding, solution finding. So that was the nature of the job. And I think entrepreneurship and coffee, it's the same thing, right? Like coffee, it's not as fast as technology, but it's changing, every day. New processing methods, new ways to make coffee, tariffs and how that affects your business. So basically, you're forced to be on your toes as a business owner. And when I was in IT consulting, every day felt like a new day.
So the muscle of vigilance and awareness was really something that sounds like helped you, whereas a coffee passionate person might have blinders on to a lot of the things that you were trained to be aware of, and it's just part of your nature.
I'm sure we also had the blinders on at the beginning, right? I think back then our roast was super light, right? And everyone's saying, "Hey, your coffee's too sour, etc." Because they're like, "Hey, Andre, what did you do well at the beginning?" But I always remember what we did wrong was when we started in 2013. The world has progressed, at least from a specialty coffee perspective, right? They're Tokyo has moved on, Sydney has moved on, Chicago has moved on, Singapore has moved on. So when we started Yardstick, we skipped a lot of things. I didn't have brew cards anymore. I'm like, that's so 2010, right? And then someone told me, "Hey, Andre, for Australia to reach this, they had this long history of Italian coffee culture, and that's why Melbourne has a rich coffee culture, right?" But I skipped all that, learning that gap, and I wish I could do it all over again and start slower for the Philippines.
Interesting. So, but now it's 11 years on, and when you started Yardstick, you might feel like you skipped into some things that you needed to learn. Everyone learns certain things the hard way. Some people, they learn these lessons only after a year or two. Can they look back and say, "I guess I did learn something in that moment"? What is it that you learned from your experience in roasting and coffee before you started Yardstick that helped you just in the first couple of years of beginning that company? And I guess I'm kind of curious too, because Yardstick is a roasting company, but you also have retail locations. And so was that always the goal? Was that something that you had in mind from the very beginning? And how did your initial couple of years take shape?
So Kevin and Jessica and I knew what we wanted to do. So I've gone to the US, etc. I was learning how to roast coffee. So we knew the model, which is roasting, is a bit more scalable. And I was making coffee one day in Singapore on a weekend. And then we met someone who was about to franchise and open Toby's Estate in the Philippines, right? And Toby's Estate being the more well-known roasters out of Australia. We were like, hey, that's probably the best. That was a tipping point in terms of if Toby's starts in Manila, it's going to get everyone interested in specialty coffee, right? And because we positioned Yardstick to be a B2B company, if everyone sees the success of Toby's, then we'll have a market to build beyond after the success of Toby's, right? So in 2013, Yardstick was primarily a B2B company. So we were roasting coffee. We were also distributors for La Marzocco and Rocket. Very fortunate from day one. And we also had an education component, right? So I think I was one or the second SCA certified instructor back then. So I think it was these three pillars, right? Education, equipment, and coffee, which we think were needed for someone's business to be able to run a good coffee program for a good 7, 8, 9 years. And until today, we're still very much a B2B company. And it was only after the pandemic where we decided to slowly split the company. And so now we have a roasting company, which is Yardstick, and the machine company is now separate from Yardstick.
Okay. And so when you began in the first couple of years, starting with B2B, what is it that you did for the businesses that you feel was something that you noticed a lack in or just wanted to give them that would make them successful with your coffee, but just in business?
No, I think the blinders that we had then was like, hey, your coffee's not as good. It can be better, right? At a very fundamental level. But I think what we were noticing was people were starting to travel from outside the Philippines and coming back. So they would experience all these coffee shops and cafes and roasters around the world, but not necessarily back in Manila, which is the capital of the Philippines. And we're like, hey, I think you can experience this, but not only in our space, but in Toby's Estate space, in this cafe, in this hotel. So the potential, that total addressable market, serviceable market, was a lot bigger in the Philippines compared to maybe Singapore, which is a smaller market. And what made the Philippines even more attractive is it's a coffee producing country. We knew that we could make some impact over there. But at the beginning, we were kind of importing 100% of our coffee.
Okay. 100% Philippines coffee.
Oh, no. At the beginning, we were importing from around the world except the Philippines. Because in 2013, we tried local coffees. They were not to the level where we were happy with it. But I mean, there's another story there where I met someone from Seattle. She moved back to the Philippines, walked into her cafe, and her university thesis was to bring Filipino coffee back to the world. And 11 years later, they're running a very successful business as well, showcasing Filipino coffee to the world.
That's really cool. So that particular region has really developed a lot more over the years. And it sounds like that's something that's folded into the way you source and what you feature on your roasting lineup.
Oh, for sure. I think it's hard for us to ignore that it's a producing country and then that the quality has grown and become better over the years. But our sourcing philosophy has never been fixed to one origin or processing style or even all high-end coffees. Our sourcing philosophy has always been, here's what we enjoy, and it's always a range, and it's up to you to find whatever you want. So it's really offering coffee drinkers in the Philippines and cafes and restaurants a range and helping them discover what they want rather than telling them that this is better than this.
In the beginning, you were saying, hey, we roasted really light and people said our coffee was sour. And then I imagine that it was just a matter of time of developing your coffees more, increasing the solubility, and looking now to your lineup. How many coffees are you offering, and break down the philosophy a little bit more between blends and single origins? Because having everything for everybody is literally impossible, but you got to break it down into categories, I guess.
So because we started out as a wholesaler, we had 3 evergreen blends, right? Because what we realized was, as a wholesaler, our clients wanted consistency because they would get customers that would drink a cappuccino every day, and they would say, hey, I want that same cappuccino on a daily basis, right? And that's maybe for a restaurant or for a brunch place or for a hotel. And that's very different from a coffee roastery who might have a space, and their program could be rotating a lot more frequently compared to a hotel's coffee program, for example. So because we were a B2B company for the majority of our existence so far, we had kind of like 3 evergreen blends on offer. And then we always had kind of like 1 single origin espresso every quarter. So these were kind of like our mainstay espresso coffees. And we would kind of have, I would say, 8 to 12 filter coffees within a season. So this was pre-pandemic, right? And then so we had like 4 blends and then about 8 to 12 coffees for filter within a season. But when COVID happened, what we realized and what people realized that they wanted a variety, right? So you would see people kind of like packing in 125 grams, 50 grams, kind of. So people were exploring all these different coffees. So now, post-pandemic, we still have our 3 evergreen blends and we still have a new single origin espresso every quarter. But now we have 4 to 6 filter coffees that drop every month.
Oh, wow. Okay. Just different or...
And for filter coffees, they're separated into 2 main categories. Regular filter coffee, so your washed Ethiopians, Nicaraguans, etc. But we also have our secret stash, which are your kind of fancy cedrus, anaerobics, geishas, etc.
Well, hey everyone, it's Chris, and I'm hoping that you're enjoying this episode with Andre Chanco of Yardstick Coffee in Singapore. One thing that I want to talk to you about, 2 things actually. First, it's Arto Brick. Second, we're going to talk about the Barista series from Pacific. These are our sponsors for today's episode. If you go to Arto Brick, we'll start with them. Tiles, stonework, hard surfaces. These are things that your cafe is made up of. Literally, it's the substance of your cafe. And if you want your cafe to be beautiful, unique, and substantial, and have a literal great feel, this is the company to link up with. Arto Brick. You can go to their website, arto.com, but definitely you go follow them on Instagram at Arto Brick, and you should DM the owner, Armin. He's one of the owners of this company. It's a family-run, founded and run company. He's one of the sons that run it now. Their father, Arto, started it in the 70s in LA, and everything is made there. And they just make dreams come true when it comes to aesthetics and the feel of a cafe with tiles, stonework, and hard surfaces. So check them out. And I also want you to go to the website pacificfoodservice.com to get samples of the Pacific Barista series and steam it, taste it, and see what I'm talking about when I say that this is a product that performs the way that you want a plant-based beverage to perform. Stands up to the heat from steaming. It produces great texture for latte art, and it also creates balance in the cup, so the flavor is always, like I said, balanced. It's focused on coffee. And this company has been supporting coffee primarily through their product because they listen to people and they tweak it based on the feedback from professional baristas, but also just in their presence in the industry. They are huge fans of you. That's really one of the things that sets them apart. So check them out at pacificfoodservice.com. One of the things you should really look out for your menu, if you want the best plant-based beverages, is using the Barista series from Pacific. Now, let's get back to our episode. I imagine the demand for those fancier coffees, especially with the online trends of different processing methods and competitions and things that highlight these, has increased.
Yeah, for sure. I do love the simplicity of kind of like lesser coffees and buying from the same producer on a yearly basis. I miss that part of it. But I think the pandemic kind of forced everyone to provide variety. Having said that, now that we're post 2022, we're cleaning up our coffee program and we're starting to buy from the same producers again on a yearly basis, right? I think that's something that we wanted to do from the beginning, but COVID did not allow us to travel to origin, and we were just kind of buying from importers. 3 years later, I think we're now trying to revamp our coffee program to be more intentional rather than just providing variety. Yeah.
Showcasing coffee and showing what it can do. And you can do this in your space too. You mentioned your space. Talk more about that and what it is you want to demonstrate to wholesale clients, both in coffee and in service.
Great question, Chris. So for about 8 years, we only had one space, and that space was kind of like a roastery workshop and our show space for what we do. When it was COVID, we had to shut our doors, but we still served coffee curbside. And that made us realize, hey, we're impacting restaurants and hotels, yes, but there's so much more coffee drinkers that we could impact. So therefore, post-pandemic, we're like, hey, yes, the B2B business is great, but let's start to open more retail experiences where we can push the boundary of how coffee can be experienced. And that's in the name for us. So prior to this call, we had a meeting with like an HR culture consultant, and so much of the conversation was maintaining the culture in a room when we were just 8 to 10 people, but now we're 180 as a company, and how culture is changed and maintained and developed over time. But something that has never changed in the past 11 years, Chris, is the name of the company, which is Yardstick. And that reminds us to always push it to the next level, right? Whether it's internally how we work or externally how we want to push the industry forward. We're not saying we're the right way, but we just have this view of how coffee can be experienced. Now we have 9 spaces. And I think one of the things that we've learned is every space is different, and we need to respect the culture of where that space resides in, right? So we're not kind of your blue bottle watch house model where it's a nice copy and paste. I mean, I think listening to your conversation with Roland, that was quite interesting how they differentiate from the blue bottles of the world. But for us, every space is different in the sense that if I have a space in the CBD where everyone needs a quick coffee and a quick lunch, if we find a space by the beach, whatever concept we have in the city might not necessarily work along the beach, along the coast, right? Because people who are a tourist down, the boardwalk, they'll prefer a different coffee experience compared to your Monday to Friday daily hustle. So whenever we open a new space, it's really trying a new concept, pushing ourselves a bit further. That also means we're putting ourselves in situations where we understand our wholesale clients even better, right? Like, how can I understand how you run your business if we've never tried running how a bakery runs like, right? So we're about to open a bakery, but that's because there's so many bakeries now with a good coffee program. But how can we help service you better if I don't understand how your business works? So every Yardstick space is different, with kind of coffee being the common denominator across all the spaces.
How do you collect the lessons you learn in order to build the culture more so that it's not just 9 spaces that are functioning, the numbers look good, but you talked about just now the idea that we want to know more, but institutional knowledge is not just a given, it's something you have to capture. So, what does that look like?
Two things here that happened fundamentally in the past, I would say 4 or 5 years. During COVID, because we were forced to work remotely as a business, because people were stuck here in this city and that city, we implemented a system or a framework called EOS. It's called Entrepreneur Operating System. It's quite a famous, popular framework across different industries. So that taught us to be a bit more data driven and target driven, and everything that we do is measurable. So we have weekly scorecards, etc. So everything we do, whether it's performance ads or foot traffic through the door, or even as strict as we have to open a new shop in 90 days, kind of like what are the KPIs. So we try to measure through our weekly L10 meetings. We're 4 years into the program, and on hindsight, it's one of the best things that Kevin, my business partner, implemented. And the second one was so much reflection during COVID, but I guess for specialty coffee professionals or entrepreneurs, so much of what we do is what our vision is of how coffee can be experienced, right? But during COVID, we sent out a survey to our customers, and it was about 980 something results back. And for me, that was the biggest realization that who we thought our customers were, it was like a totally different story, right? Like who they are, how old they are, what they find important, or how they define quality. That was to us super insightful, that it kind of drove our product roadmap ever since.
Interesting. And since driving your product roadmap, and we had someone on the show a while back from Mirror Coffee Roasters talking about customer feedback. And I don't know if people do this enough. So I'm really happy to hear you talk about this survey because now that you say it shifted the way you approach things, did you find your shift was effective?
I think with customer feedback, I think every business should always be listening. And maybe that's also one of my learnings from being in tech, where it's very much iterative and kind of like having user feedback so often whenever we could. I think it's a fine balance as well. Like someone can walk into your shop and say, hey, your coffee's too dark, for example, right? And this happens for us at a shop level and also at a wholesale QA level. How do we receive and act on feedback? Do we change because one person says it's slightly more developed today? Or do we only act on a feedback if say, hey, across all your 9 shops, the air condition is a bit too warm? And we're only doing this as of recent, where documenting feedback, analyzing it, and making sure that we have the right steps and not necessarily overreacting to customer feedback. With the survey, it was quite holistic, we feel, from qualitative, quantitative, preferences, industry level, brand level. And we learned so much from that exercise.
I get this picture in my mind of this type of system as the same kind of thing that happens with roasting software, tracking things, having the roast curve and all the other data points. In the end, it's so helpful to have as a tool to aid you in what ultimately is the taste of the coffee. For your cafes, that taste is part of a larger product, which is the experience in your cafes. What's the universal experience that you want people to walk away? I know it's different you mentioned the CBD and other places, but what's the universal experience you want people to have?
We always look back into our travels and try to remember what was that first experience like sipping or experiencing specialty coffee. And I'm sure you have that core memory locked in your system. Our goal is how do we recreate that, but in everyday moments, right? And then it's a lot harder because to most people, they go into your cafe purely functional, or they would go to your cafe for a social gathering, right? But how do I create that memorable experience of experiencing coffee for the first time? And whenever we brief the team from a design perspective, the word that I always use is I want someone to feel transported. And it's quite powerful if it's done well. I remember walking into the first 4-barrel coffee in San Francisco, and I'm like, what is this space? It looks different from what I think a cafe is. And I think kind of that is a core memory. And I hope that whenever someone visits one of our spaces is, they have that discomfort and uncomfortable feeling, but they leave, transported.
That's great. It's an interesting tension to have something that's slightly different, uncomfortable, but then transported. It almost feels like when I'm being transported and I have faith in my driver, like I'm okay, I can relax. And it's like your cafes are driving the experience and the people are driving the experience. And that's another thing that you've got to look at when it comes to success of a brand is your culture is largely based on the behaviors of people over time. And with your cafes, I'm curious, and even across the company, what does the hiring look like when it comes to non-negotiables, character traits, and experience and that kind of thing?
We've only been running retail for about 3 years now, from like one shop to about 9. But I think we're quite proud of our onboarding and continuous learning program. And I can share more about that. I think back in the day, you would get sent to the bar and like learn on the job, right? But because what we learned was, at least for the Philippines, and this is quite a touchy subject, is people who work in coffee may not necessarily be a customer of specialty coffee, right? Meaning for them, it's just a job, or they love food and beverage, or they love coffee. But because maybe on a weekend, they live 3 hours away, there's no cafe near their home, or they rather spend money and time with family and other things, they don't know what it's like to be transported, in the example that I gave earlier, right? But it's like if you want to ask a chef to cook Japanese food, but they've never been to Japan, how can they cook Japanese food to the closest way possible? So in our 10 to 15 day onboarding program, and the extra 5 days is more of a refresher, it's, I would say, 60% intangible and 40% hard skills, right? And the intangibles include a field trip to visiting different cafes and restaurants and being a customer. The intangibles include, hey, Chris, hey, Diana, pick a topic and come back in 2 days and present it to the class. And that's like me walking to your cafe and like, hey, what's the difference between a Pacamara and a Margot Hipe, right? And it's really putting them in an uncomfortable situation where they get to learn something in a very short amount of time and then express it within the 10 to 15 day onboarding. Continuous learning. Every site has a head barista, and you're not a head barista perpetually. We refresh that every year. And head baristas are expected to also share in cup coffees. And until this day, I still, at 170 people, I still do the last interview for anyone on the floor, just to make sure that we're keeping everything in check, from at least from my vision of how service should be within the space.
What does that mean? Service should be?
We have this, and she's now in Auckland studying to be a doctor, I think. And her name is Carmeli, but we call her Charm. And what was great with Charm was it was her first job with us, but we would get questions and compliments from customers saying, hey, does she own the business? Looking back, I think people felt that Charm owned the business because she cared a little bit more. And I think that is not learned over 15 days. I think that's learned over time. So much of my questions during that my interview is only like 10 to 15 minutes, is back in the day when HR was like, hey, Andre, this person wants to start his own cafe. Let's not hire him. Now it has changed to let's hire him or her, because if they want to start his or her own cafe, I was in that spot 10 years ago, they will care a lot more than most. Right. So I think that caring a little bit extra, whether it's for the coffee you're dialing in or whether that customer in seat number 4 needs water refilled, I think that's the intangible that we're finding. It's a lot more difficult, to be honest, to achieve.
Yeah, that is difficult. But that ownership that people have innately over the space and the thing they preside over. I'm reminded of what you were talking about at the beginning, where with systems consulting, you're looking at in aggregate, what it produces, and all the systems have to work together to produce this thing. So if you're considering the cafe as a system, a person who is a barista working to extend themselves beyond the counter, to the corners of the cafe, to the patio, to the bathroom, and all the practical things that you feel like this is the experience of coffee. It's not just the pour over, right? That is a form of awareness that I think every professional should aspire to.
I envy kind of like single shop businesses or concepts, because you get to kind of hire and retain the best within a single space. But then I guess I took it upon ourselves to say that, okay, we have 9 shops, then it only means that we get to train more people and share more coffee to other people. But it also means it's a lot more difficult to kind of like maintain and develop that culture. But we're enjoying the challenge. And that's why before this call, we had a meeting about culture.
I think you're painting a rosy picture of your your 9 cafes. And I feel like if I say that word 9 cafes often enough, it's going to induce a lot of anxiety in most people that are hearing it. It's a lot. And so when it comes to problem solving, I mean, you've got a team, you've got people, you've got head baristas or lead baristas, and you've got managers, no doubt, throughout the organization. How do you gracefully address issues to help that culture continue? Because it's not just, hey, these are great opportunities for us to give more coffee. It's also, we have to protect the culture. Sometimes there's problems, there's challenges that aren't fun to deal with.
I listened to one of your shift breaks for this, where as much as we've developed all these systems, I think part of what I'm learning now is to let go and to delegate and to trust. So now we have reached a point, Chris, where we're hiring people a lot older than us, a lot more experience, who worked in food and beverage, who worked in a finance company. I think being surrounded in our L10 meeting with a team of 8 or 10 of us who are a lot smarter than us, I think that helps kind of like tackle what you mentioned, which are the challenges and issues. So that's how we tackle it at a management level. And eventually we have different roles and positions within each location. At least at my level, where I still care so much about the brand, is like the more shops you are, the less sexy it is, right? Or there's this perceived notion of quality cannot scale, right? So at least at a brand level and or a perceived, because a small will always be beautiful, at least with specialty coffee. Like as we open more touch points, how do we grow the company to dispel those myths that quality can't scale, that people can't scale, that authenticity and culture can scale? And it's honestly still a work in progress for us, Chris. And it's an exciting challenge, to be honest.
Yeah, it is a challenge. What I was thinking is that even if you're really big, and let's just pick the biggest entity out there, whatever corporate store you want to think of that's global brand, Luckin Coffee or Starbucks or something like that. For a customer, if you put yourself in their position, it is a small experience because it's their experience. And that is a interesting way to, when you go about interviewing every barista, when you go about having the leadership that's necessary at each location to make sure that that particular store runs the way it needs to run, it's a respect to the customer. It's an honoring of the customer's perspective, which is you could have 1,000 stores, but this is my store.
That makes so much sense. And I've never seen it from that angle before. But yeah, I think there's truth into that. And what we're learning as well is for that customer to feel like it's their store, there's a high correlation with our real customer, which is our employees, right? Because if employee turnover is high, that impacts how that customer feels that he's a regular, right? So imagine if Charm says, hey, Chris, I'm making your cortado today the way you like it, not so hot, right? But if Charm resigns, you walk in tomorrow, Daniel will be like, hey, Chris, what can I get you today, right? So that will automatically change. So there's this correlation between treating our primary customers or secondary, which is our employees. And if we figure out that recipe for success, then it should all trickle down. Because, I mean, we say we're in coffee, but like we're in hospitality industry, right? So much of it is relationships and people.
Yeah. That's right. It is relationships and people. And you hit on something that I think is a roasting philosophy too, which is, your blend is, you can get the same, quote unquote, the same coffees, but after like 11 years, are you getting the same coffees really? Not necessarily, but you know what the result is. And if you inevitably have to say Charm goes to Auckland, right? If Charm's not working for the cafe, there is a onboarding of a new employee or a succession of responsibility to pass the baton for those regulars and the nuances of their orders and that kind of a thing. It's similar to switching and dialing in a new origin or a new harvest of coffee. When you're thinking about your roasting, the roasting part of this correlating to the cafes and what you want people to perceive of Yardstick's coffee, What is it that the cafes have produced for you in terms of knowledge of your coffee that is so different than it was for the first 8 years of your business?
Oh, wow. No, I think something that we've learned, and we learned this with a challenge, was previously it was me roasting, and eventually I handed it over to Jordan. And then when Jordan left for the Middle East, it was a very challenging time because, I had to roast again. But at the same time, because a roaster left, there's this perceived notion that quality might suffer. Jordan was quite a persona for the brand because he was out there for competitions, judging, etc. So that's number one. And number two, so we had a head barista before who was an AeroPress champion. So we sent him to Rimini. We were him in Amsterdam when he won kind of the Philippines Barista Champion. And so when these two key individuals left, it shaped how we would roast and brew coffee moving forward, right? So for example, now it's a bit difficult, but at the moment, Chris, we have about 4 roasters. And that 4 roasters, we just need to make sure that we're calibrated and then that they're trained across the 3 machines and then that they're always learning from one coffee to the other, from one profile to the other. And how that translates back to the bar is we just push so much different coffees now for the 4 to 6 filter coffees a month, just exposing the palates of our own baristas. Because I feel that to learn how to roast, to learn how to brew coffee, you need to taste a lot more. So we're just putting more coffees through, number one. And number two, we have a lot of redundancies in place to make sure that the coffee program still runs and it's still the best experience for the customer.
Love that. Yeah. And it sounds like you're multiplying systems, which kind of is your wheelhouse, in order to make sure that as you get bigger, those experiences are consistent because you perceive that there is a chance that as you scale, it very well could get out of hand unless you invest into that bolstering and the edifice is actually strong enough to handle the weight of the company now.
In the past 11 years, I worked on a tech startup. My iterative thinking now is one of the things that I took away from that startup. And tech and a physical store are completely different ways of iterating or like failing fast and learning fast. But that's what we're trying to do. And again, back to the name of the company is we're always trying to push it forward, right? And we do make a lot of mistakes. And I'm sure we've lost some customers over the years. But I think for Yardstick, I think we understand our place in this bigger puzzle. We're just trying to keep reminding ourselves of that role that we have.
Yeah. Well, I only have 1 or 2 questions left here for you, and in particular about you. You've changed in the years in coffee. What is it that's different about you today than you with stars in your eyes about coffee when it was that like the first year of business?
I think it's still, Kevin and Jessica and I, we still have a vision for what Yardstick should be or could be. But so much of, at least for me now, it's not so much what I want for myself, but what is good for the company. Because, with 170 people, that's maybe 170 families, right? So there's a lot more responsibility to make sure that not only are we the yardstick of how coffee should be experienced in Manila or the Philippines, but how can we be a yardstick of running a small company, small to medium-sized company? Because I think any entrepreneurial journey is slightly self-serving to what we want to share to the world. But now, 11 years later, it's finding that balance of what the vision is, while at the same time keeping the boat afloat.
Well, final word to entrepreneurs and operators who want to develop their businesses in a way that also cares for people, cares for the customer, but also the people that are making the vision a reality.
And I'm not sure, maybe it's our character or maybe it's an Asian trait, but I'm sure it's present in most business owners. Sometimes we're afraid to ask or too shy to ask. But I think my number one advice is it's okay to not know and ask someone else for help. And I was not shy about it, right? Your podcasts have shaped how we run the company as well. And that's kind of me listening to your advice and you asking questions to other entrepreneurs. And I think ask questions and don't be shy about it.
That's awesome, man. Thank you. And that's good advice. We do mention on the show often that these are conversations you're listening to, and conversations are accessible to you as well. You can go have conversations with people. It's a good idea. Andre, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing your story. And I think people should continue to learn more about what you do. So, where can they go online to get plugged into that world?
First, thanks, Chris, for having us on the show. I think it's apart from listening to you on my flights, it's good to have a conversation today. And for kind of like what we do as a company, it's at Yardstick Coffee on Instagram and our website. I think that's where to keep up to date with our constant pursuit of pushing it to the next level.
Excellent, Andre. Honored to have you on the show. Thank you so much,
Chris. Appreciate it.
Well, everybody, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Andre Chanco. Huge thank you to Andre for sharing the story, for being so open about the lessons and details of how this company was founded, how it's succeeded all of these years. And I definitely think that this holds a lot of insights that will help you in your business as well. If you want to learn more about Yardstick Coffee, you can go to their website, yardstickcoffee.com, and definitely check out their Instagram, which is, as you might suspect, at Yardstick Coffee. And one thing that I take away from this conversation that I think is really instructive is the idea that when you are able to collaborate with others, the way that Andre did with his university friends, the way that they do with just these companies fulfilling different needs of their community in coffee, and really trying to showcase what can happen with coffee in their own cafes for the sake of others, to have a yardstick, a comparison of what's possible. This is the kind of thing that if you keep it up over the years, it builds this momentum that allows not only stability for your company, but also it provides a certain kind of organizational self-knowledge that allows you to then have insights for other people as well. Insights for people that is born from your own personal experience and knowledge of yourself. Obviously, Yardstick has been doing this long enough that they have a way that they do things, and they have changed over the years. The way they roast coffee, the way they source coffee now, but it's an upward trajectory, and it's their way of improving. And so that, to me, that's the takeaway, is let's apprentice ourselves to the process of what we are becoming, and just become more yourself, more stable because of the curiosity that you give to the process of what you're doing and how you're delivering value to the people who rely on your coffee, on your coffee shops, on your brand. I think that sense of responsibility is this transcending, like bigger than yourself thing that helps us sustain the effort over many years. So again, huge thank you to Andre. Check out Yardstick online. You can find links to all of the companies and Yardstick Coffee on the show notes for this episode. And by the way, you can also check out the recommended episodes. We have always a list of recommended episodes. There's also links that you'll see at the bottom of our show notes that link you to places to apply for key holder coaching groups that we're now opened applications for, and also consulting and coaching that might be able to help you. That's working one-on-one with me as your coach and consultant for your coffee shop. So check those out. Reach out directly if you want, Chris at keystotheshop.com. And with that, I'll say goodbye. I'm grateful that you joined me again. Stay tuned for more episodes coming up. And as far as this episode is concerned, I'm really hoping that it truly gave you keys to the shop.